The NFL draft is well and truly over, so it's time to talk Dynasty. Today, I take you through my top 30 quarterback rankings on the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. Today we're talking quarterbacks. For some reason, I've been ranked the most accurate quarterback ranker by Fantasy Pros 2 of the last 3 years, so hopefully these help you out in your leagues. Obviously, Dynasty leagues are difficult because it really depends on whether you're trying to challenge now or whether you're trying to build for the future. So if you're unsure what to do with your league and your specific situation, make sure you hit me up on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. You can also check out my full rankings over at ffdfantasyfootball.com. We've just done up the website. Let us know if you like it or if you think anything needs to change as we are trying to make sure that it's exactly what you guys need to help you out with your rankings. Also be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. But today, I'm taking you through my top 30 for Dynasty. We're talking quarterbacks. Let's get right into it. And for me, the number one guy is still absolutely Josh Allen. And this has not changed for some time now. He's just so consistent. That rushing floor is a massive boon for him. He's been a top 2 quarterback, and we're talking 4-point passing touchdowns, by the way, in all of the last 5 years. And that makes him very consistent. While his passing yardage was down a little bit last year, he still had that consistent floor. He had significantly less intercepts. He had a third of the intercepts that he had the season before. So he's just getting very consistent. The biggest concern here, of course, is the wide receiver group, with really led by Keon Coleman, who didn't do much last year, and Khalil Shakir. So that's a little bit of a concern. They did bring in Josh Palmer, but I do think we do have to recognize that that may lead to a slight downturn. But overall, if you're thinking longer term in Dynasty, he's someone who's going to be around for the long term and stay consistently good, especially because he's not leaning on his legs quite as much as he used to, but still getting a heap of rushing touchdowns. At number 2, this is a bit of a move up for me. I've got Joe Burrow. Obviously had a big down year in 2023, but he bounced back and looked very solid last year as the QB3. I feel like he can do exactly the same thing now that they've re-signed T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. They've put all the pieces in place for him. There's great passing options. They're not leaning on the run game as much. They really are leaning on Burrow and his talent. Their defense is also still pretty weak, which means they have to pass the ball. And that means you're going to get a whole lot of shootouts for the Bengals. And that can only help Burrow in the long term. So he's someone who's going to stay consistently good. He's still young. He's still got heaps of years ahead of him. He's not even in his 30s yet. So this is going to be someone you can build your Dynasty team around. And number 3, and it was my favorite rookie last year in Jayden Daniels. I wasn't the only one in that, but even going in the draft process, I really liked him, and he paid off last year. That rushing, those 900-odd rushing yards, really helps, but his passing game was excellent as well. He's very accurate, and I feel like with Deebo Samuel in town, they give him one more passing option. I think he's going to be very solid in general. He's someone in Dynasty you can just continue to build your team around, knowing that even when that rushing floor drops, and it will eventually, he's still got the arm to be able to sustain fantasy production. And that's what sets him apart from a lot of these other rushing quarterbacks, where they're good rushers, but they don't have the arm talent. With Jayden Daniels, I do believe that he could still be a very good NFL quarterback even without his legs. I mean, not without any legs at all, obviously, but without his rushing ability. And for that reason, I really like Daniels as a top 3 Dynasty quarterback. Plus, still very young, still only 25, and that means he's got a lot of time ahead of him. And number 4, it's hard not to put Patrick Mahomes up high, even though he's disappointed the last couple of seasons. They've really worked hard at trying to get wide receivers around him and giving him a whole heap of weapons. With Rashee Rice back, they've obviously still got Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown hopefully playing all season, and Travis Kelce still going around. That's a heap of weapons for them to rely on, and they don't have great running backs. So I do think we're going to see a renewed passing game. It's really going to be about whether the O-line can improve this season. But I do think long-term, talking about a guy who is going to remain a fantasy asset even as he ages, because he has natural arm talent and because he's going to be able to be someone who plays well into his 30s. Obviously, he's only 30 right now. It wouldn't be surprising to get another 10 years or so out of him. And I feel like that's what you want for your fantasy team, especially in Dynasty. Jalen Hurts, on the other hand, I feel like he is a little bit limited by his passing. We're talking about a guy who's never had more than 23 passing touchdowns. He has improved his accuracy overall. He had that one bad year in 2023, but for the most part, not many interceptions. The problem is he relied really heavily on rushing touchdowns. Saquon Barkley didn't really affect that last year, but I do still think there is a little bit of concern about how sustainable that is. I know he's still young at the moment. He's still only 27, but he is going to, as he ages, struggle to produce for fantasy. So if you're thinking longer term in Dynasty, this is a guy who within maybe 5 years' time, all of a sudden might not be the fantasy asset that some of these other guys will be, because the arm talent isn't quite there compared to those other guys. Still very good passer of the ball, but not quite elite like a lot of these other guys. So he's someone that can come in and win it for you straight away. And he might even be my QB1, certainly in the top 3 quarterbacks for redraft this season. I just think in Dynasty, he gets a little bit of a hit because longevity isn't there. And it's exactly the same issue with Lamar Jackson, who was fantastic for fantasy last year. He was the QB1, second QB1 season of his career. And obviously he was the QB3 the season before as well. There are always going to be injury concerns with anyone who's rushing for nearly 1,000 yards every season. And he doesn't even get that many rushing touchdowns, which is really strange. He's had 14 total rushing touchdowns the last 4 seasons, which is the kind of numbers we're seeing from Jalen Hurts in one season. But his passing took a big improvement last year, 41 passing touchdowns and only 4 interceptions. Can he sustain that this year? I'm not so sure. I feel like it might be a little bit of a challenge to keep that yardage high. I think teams are going to start to work him out and he's going to have to go back to relying on his legs. And I feel like as those legs fade, and they will, because he is kind of getting to the point where you start to slow down a little bit of a runner now that he's 28, I feel like he's going to get found out for his passing a bit, and that is ultimately going to hurt. I still think you're going to get a good 5 years of really solid production out of him. But at that point, I do think he's going to be somebody that you don't particularly want for fantasies. He kind of hits his early to mid 30s. So for that reason, he's a little bit lower than the others. But realistically, I have everyone from Burrow to Lamar Jackson pretty darn close. If you were trading between either of these guys, it really depends on the team situation you're in, and I wouldn't be adding very much to be moving up the line because there really isn't that much difference between Burrow and Jackson. There is then a massive drop-off from outside the top 6. I've got Caleb Williams here just because the team is so intent on making his life easier. They've really improved the O-line. They've given him a heap of receiving weapons. They haven't added another running back, which means they're not going to be relying on the run game too much. They want Williams to be the guy that makes it work. I feel like that he should be someone who can improve as a dynasty quarterback and has a long career ahead of him. This is a risky move, though, and I do acknowledge that, but I don't think we saw the best of him last year. Still only 24, still has plenty of room for growth. So he's someone that I would rather over these other risky plays. Everyone outside the top 6 comes with an element of risk, but I feel like Williams probably has the most upside. And number 8, CJ Stroud obviously had a down year compared to his first season, but the team has made real efforts to rebuild the O-line. I just don't think they've done a particularly good job, but I think they'll recognize that, and this is something that they're going to make an important thing over the coming seasons. And even if it's not right this year, I do feel like they are going to give him the weapons around him. They've got a heap of good wide receivers there, obviously a solid running game as well, but it is difficult because Stroud doesn't have that rushing floor of a lot of quarterbacks. He only has like 400 total rushing yards over his first 2 seasons. And that obviously means for fantasy, he doesn't have the same ability to get it done with his legs when the passing game is not working for whatever reason. So he has a lower weekly floor and a lower seasonal floor. And that makes him a lot riskier, especially because it did seem like teams started to find him out last season. Having said that, I do feel like the talent's there for him to work it out. And I feel like this is a team that's going to be good for seasons to come, especially with all the wide receiver strength they've got at the moment. So he's someone they still want for Dynasty. Kyler Murray's another guy who's a little bit risky. We know he was someone that was the number 1 quarterback back in 2020, and then injuries really tore him apart. He played all of last season, but he didn't quite look like himself. His rushing certainly increased a little bit, but that was more through necessity than desire, I think. there is significant risk here because he could easily end up losing the starting job. We're also talking about a guy who's never had more than 26 passing touchdowns in a season. So the floor is very low, but they are making efforts to try to build this passing game in general. And I do feel like this season we could see the Kyler of old. The problem is that he is always going to have a lower floor long term because he is naturally smaller. And when you take away his legs, which will eventually happen as he heads into his 30s in a couple of years' time, that is naturally going to start to hurt him. So there's some risk here, but I do feel like there's more upside than most of the guys around him because of his legs. Justin Herbert is quite close to Kyler Murray for me, but again, he has struggled outside that one big season to do much for fantasy. He was very accurate last season, but they still seemed really intent on running the ball. And I feel like the fact that they brought in 2 new running backs suggests they want to keep doing that. Having said that, they also brought in Trey Harris, so there are some weapons around him. I think the Chargers, just in general, are going to be a better team next season. That generally helps the quarterback. Plus, we know that Justin Herbert is just a very talented passer of the ball, and that means that long-term, whether it's with the Chargers or elsewhere, he is going to be a good NFL quarterback, and hence he's going to hang around for fantasy, even if he's not a top option at any point in time. And that security can be very valuable, especially compared to the 3 guys we just talked about. Now, outside the top 10, there's a lot more risk. And I'm starting off with Drake May because I do feel like Drake May has the sort of ability to become a really good NFL quarterback. We started to see it in patches last year, and I think I'd have him higher if he wasn't with the Patriots. I just don't really trust what they're doing. Their wide receiver core is really weak. I don't think Stephon Diggs coming in to be the number 1 guy is the right option. I don't think he looked washed last year, but he certainly didn't look like the Diggs of old. I feel like Drake May needs some better weapons around him, and I don't think they've given that to him. And I don't think they're really intent on focusing on their quarterback. I feel like he's someone who can run the ball a little bit, but they're not really giving him the right opportunities. I have concerns. I have concerns around him, but the ceiling is very high. He's a very good natural passer of the ball. One of the best young quarterbacks around, and I do feel like the ceiling is there. So if you're willing to take a big swing, I feel like it's there. It's just the problem is it might be difficult in the next season or two, and it might take a little bit of time to build, and holding on to him and relying on that happening at some stage is going to become trickier and trickier. You do have to hope that they start to build some better weapons around him, though. At number 12, right behind him, Bo Nix. And this is a guy that I don't really like as a NFL talent. I think he's solid. I think he came in absolutely pro-ready. But I feel like the ceiling is basically what we're seeing already. I don't think there's that much room for improvement. He played so long in college that he basically came in ready to go. Everyone was a little bit surprised by what the Broncos were doing. I think they're going to get fanned out a little bit more this year. Having said that, they've put a lot of really good weapons around him. The run game is clearly something they're not going to be able to feature. They don't really have the running backs to mean it's something they can rely on. I feel like they therefore need to use Bo Nix. Plus, he had a surprisingly good rushing floor last season. 430 yards and 4 rushing touchdowns ain't bad. And I do feel like there is even room for growth there because he didn't even look like he was doing anything particularly special. So it is possible that he'll keep that floor, and that would really help him from a fantasy perspective. Having said that, I do worry about the arm talent and whether it can sustain a long career for him. And given this is Dynasty, that is what worries me a little bit compared to everybody else around this area. Baker Mayfield in at 13, obviously has had a real career resurgence at the Bucs. Top 10 in the last 2 seasons and top 5 last season. He looked fantastic. The question is whether he can keep doing it as Mike Evans ages and Chris Godwin has some injury issues. The fact they brought in Igbuka is really positive, and realistically, Mayfield isn't that far off Caleb Williams for me in Dynasty. It's just an issue of him being a little bit older. Obviously, now he's in his 30s. And we've seen kind of that he can struggle in certain situations. It's not like he's had no faults throughout his career. So there is a slightly lower rushing floor, though he did rush twice as much last season than he had in any season in the past. So they're at least bringing that into his game. Plus 4,500 passing yards is excellent. The ceiling's definitely there. It's just the floor is pretty darn low because we know that Baker has the ability to have some struggles at times. Jared Goff's another guy that's really hard to rely on because he had so many mid-years over the course of his career, but he seems to have found a home in Detroit. They do want to run the ball a lot, but they're scoring so much that it's still working for Goff. The problem is what happens when this offense isn't one of the best in the NFL? Do they suddenly become a very run-heavy team and all of a sudden Goff loses all his value? It's not like he has a rushing floor. He hasn't gone over 100 rushing yards in the past 6 seasons, and he had no rushing touchdowns at all in 3 of the last 4 seasons. So the floor is very, very low, but they're passing the ball so much that he's kind of getting away with it. The question is, do they keep doing that if the score offense gets worse? And do they keep doing that if the defense gets better? I don't know that we can believe that definitely happens, but at least at least the floor has been there the last couple of seasons, and you can expect in most games he's going to be pretty solid, except when he's throwing random 5 interception games. Dak Prescott obviously gets George Pickens in there, and that's why he rises up for me. I just don't know that Dak is going to keep going at the rate he is. He's having like a good season every second season, and that's better than nothing, but that lack of ceiling is really scary for fantasy. He was 3rd, 9th, and 4th in odd-numbered years, but 30th, 20th, and 30th in even-numbered years. It is an odd-numbered year, which means he should technically be good this season. They've certainly put the weapons around him, but he's 32 now. He doesn't have that rushing floor he used to have when he was younger. Can his arm sustain it? I think it probably can, but the injuries are going to start catching up with him at some point, and that's why he's ranked lower for me. Jordan Love at 16. I have a couple of concerns here. Firstly, I just don't think he's that great as an NFL quarterback. And while they've put a lot of the weapons in place for him, I'm not convinced that in a couple of years' time he's even going to have still going to have the starting job. They make his life really easy because the run game is excellent and they really rely on it. That's bad for fantasy, but good for him as an NFL quarterback. I feel like that lowers his ceiling, though, and he naturally has a low floor because I just don't know that he's going to be able to have a sustainable career based on his arm. We will, however, see, and I do think that it is possible he'll remain a solid NFL quarterback, and he could go to another team that's far more high scoring, or the Packers might change the way they're doing things. I just don't see that happening. I think they're going to remain a run-first offense, whether it's with Josh Jacobs or whoever they bring in after him, and for that reason, Jordan Love is always going to suffer for that reason. Trevor Lawrence also comes with quite a bit of risk, mainly because he just looked plain bad last season. Obviously, injury didn't help either, but he just didn't look great. And it's not like they did a good job of bringing weapons in around him. I don't like what they did with the whole Travis Hunter situation. That didn't really make sense to me. I feel like that's going to hurt the team overall, and they're going to stay in the doldrums for some time. I think they should have just stuck and picked and tried to rebuild the team slowly and patiently, which is generally the better way of doing things. They kind of showed a little bit of impatience there, and I think that's going to hurt them in the long run. I also don't know that Lawrence is really their true franchise quarterback. He's had some good seasons at times, but realistically didn't look great last year. Wasn't really able to run the balls effectively, which hurts for fantasy, and his passing was pretty average compared to the previous 2 seasons. I hope that he can take a step up now that he's got second-year Brian Thomas and also Hunter in there as well, but I feel like the lack of depth in wide receivers and just generally the whole team struggling might hurt him a little bit, especially long-term. I think he could easily lose his job and end up elsewhere in a worse situation again. JJ McCarthy gets a big bump because Sam Darnold is out of town. Obviously missed out last season, but this team is primed for a big playoff run. They've obviously got weapons in guys like Jefferson and Addison and Hockenson. They can run the ball as well, which takes a bit of the pressure off McCarthy. The question is he going to actually be as good as we expect him to be? For me, he was a little bit of a reach last season, but he's still better than any of the quarterbacks coming in this season. It was just a very strong quarterback class last year. I have him and Bo Nix as guys I'm a little bit concerned about, but they've definitely got starter quality upside. And I feel like with McCarthy, we just need to actually see it happen. So I'm willing to take a risk on him, knowing that if it comes together, he ends up playing in a very high scoring team in a situation where they're relying on him for years to come. That's great for fantasy. It's just long term, the risk is very high because he could end up being one and done as well. Another guy who could easily be one and done is Justin Fields. We've seen what he can do. A couple of seasons ago, he had over 1,000 rushing yards. So that ceiling is massive for him on a weekly basis and on a seasonal basis. Problem is, never had more than 17 passing touchdowns and has always had a heap of interceptions. So how's the accuracy going to be? It's hard to believe it's going to be fantastic when Garrett Wilson is really your main receiving weapon. You don't have much outside him. There's a lot of reasons for concern, but as a fantasy asset in the short term, I think he's going to be fantastic. I think he's going to have a big season if he can keep the starting job. And it's not like there's many guys there that are going to really threaten him. It's not like Tyrod Taylor's suddenly going to come in and take the job. So unless they bring in somebody else, I feel like it is Justin Fields and nobody else for this season. He gets a fair bit of runway there. Still only 26, so plenty of time for growth. This is a guy that could turn into an absolute fantasy stud. He probably won't, but he will at least give you a lot of value in the short term and someone that can help you win now. So if you're in a win now situation, he's good. And if you're thinking longer term, he could be very good as well. It's just that floor is super low. Sam Darnold is kind of on the other side of things where he goes from a team that's very high scoring, very solid team to a team that's kind of rejigs its wide receiver room, lost DK Metcalf, lost Tyler Lockett, and I don't really like what they brought in. I do understand that Jackson Smith-Njigba is very solid, but it's not like there's enough around him to really make it work. I don't really believe in Cooper Kupp. He looked absolutely washed last season. And below him, there's really absolutely nothing. They might end up relying on the tight ends a little bit more than we want. And I think the run game is going to play a big part here. Darnold doesn't have the greatest rushing floor. He's kind of like a 200-odd rushing yard guy at the best of times. So for that reason, you really are hoping that things just click for him and somehow this offense pops off. I don't think that's going to happen, though. For that reason, he drops off a lot moving from Minnesota to Seattle for me. Outside the top 20 and our first rookie for this year, Cameron Ward. Obviously, Cam Ward is a guy who is going into a really difficult situation. You got a 30-plus-year-old wide receiver as your number one guy in Calvin Ridley. You've got an even older receiver in Tyler Lockett next to him, and then a whole heap of like day three younger guys and mediocre tight end options. It's just really difficult to see this working particularly well for him. I don't really see who he's going to be able to reliably pass the ball to. In the long term, they're obviously still in a longer rebuild, and in a year or two, we might see that improve. But it's not like Cam Ward is this spectacular quarterback. He's by far the best in this year's group, but and he has a very solid ceiling, but I think he probably would have been ranked below all 6 first-round quarterbacks last season. That's the general consensus I've heard from guys in the know, and I'm inclined to agree with it as well. He does come with a little bit of a rushing floor, which helps, but I do really worried about his ability to pass and move the ball in this offense, which has traditionally been pretty run-first with Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears here as well. So I feel like that really just generally really lowers Cam Ward's floor, and I think the ceiling's pretty low as well. So that's why he's so low for me. Anthony Richardson at number 22. This is the opposite situation. The ceiling's very, very high because of his rushing ability, but we just haven't seen him do it with a passer. He looked awful last season, and that's no surprise to me. I ranked him really, really, really low out of college. I just did not see it as a passer. The lack of experience as an NFL quarterback really concerns me, but the fact that he can do it with his legs means there's at least upside. The problem is they brought in Daniel Jones, and all of a sudden there's a good chance that Jones could take over even before week 1 if he can show his passing is going to be better than Richardson's, because realistically, they've got some weapons in place to make this work, and they just have a functional quarterback. I don't think that Richardson is the guy. I don't know that Jones is the guy either, but I feel like he's got a reasonable chance of taking over. So that gives Anthony Richardson a very short leash. While he'll be a good fantasy asset while he's playing, he struggles to stay healthy and he struggles to stay in the starting lineup. And for that reason, he's someone I just can't trust. Having said that, I can't rank someone with his ceiling much lower than that. Michael Penix, I do feel like this is a little bit low. Problem is I haven't really seen it. It's not like he looked fantastic in spot plays last season. It's not like he's got an amazing offense to go around him. I do think the Falcons will be better this year, but I feel like they're not using Kyle Pitts very effectively. Bijan Robinson is a very good running back, but it's not like he's someone who helps his quarterback from a fantasy perspective. Penix is someone who's going to be inclined to stay in the pocket and isn't going to give you much with his legs as a rushing fantasy quarterback. So for that reason, I think as a fantasy asset, his ceiling is pretty low and his floor is very low, because I don't even know if he's going to be able to stay in the starting job more than a year or two. That's why he sits outside the top 20 for me. It is a little bit tough on him, but I do feel like this is about the right spot where he belongs. Brock Purdy comes in next and obviously just signed that big contract. I think that's just such a ridiculous contract for him to sign. I don't think he's shown anything to suggest he's that good. Last season, 20 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. Like that's about what you're going to get from him. He did run a lot more, which is interesting. Over 300 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns. I think that was mainly due to a lack of Christian McCaffrey, and McCaffrey's going to be back, but not long term. I just don't see the weapons here. They've got a lot of average, solid wide receivers, but Purdy needs absolute stars around him to elevate him. I don't think that contract made any sense at all. I think they were better off going and getting another game manager and trying to keep their stars and pay the stars instead of paying whoever is at quarterback. I just think the model was not what was making them successful the last few years. So I really struggle to believe that Purdy is going to be able to keep this job past a couple of years. And even if he is, I think he's just going to be a QB2 for the rest of his career, unless he's finally going to be able to get in a situation where he's not being paid so much they're actually going to be able to get proper weapons around him. Kittle's going to be gone before long. Obviously, Debo's already gone. We haven't seen enough from Brandon Ayuk, and while McCaffrey's going to be very good for a year or two, he's not going to be around for much longer either. I just don't like this for Brock Purdy. I don't trust him for fantasy. I'm not interested. Tua Tagovailoa, this is another situation where I feel like there is a lot of risk of him losing the job, but this is mainly a health issue. I think he's actually a very good NFL quarterback. He just can't stay on the field. And the biggest issue here is that they feel like they're kind of headed for a rebuild, the Dolphins. Their defense is really poor, which is generally good for fantasy, but I think they might need to rebuild everything for that reason, which means guys like Tyreek Hill goes. Who knows what happened with Jalen Waddle? He wasn't very good last season anyway. They don't really have the weapons. The run game's not what it used to be. The O-line's not what it used to be. In general, this team doesn't look very good, and I feel like they're going to have a far worse season than most people expect. For that reason, it's hard for me to rank Tua higher because I feel like we can't look too far into the future. I can't really see an imminent time where he's going to be very good for fantasy despite his natural talent. At 26, Tyler Shock, I mean, this is a tough one because he is going into a situation where he's near certainly going to be the starter. And the Saints just seem to have this intent to keep holding on, not do a proper rebuild and see if they can make things work. I do feel like they're going to run the ball quite a lot, but I feel like with the weapons they've got, with Chris Olave, I feel like there's going to be enough passing opportunities for him to at least be solid this season. And I feel like he is pro-ready enough that he'll at least get a couple of good seasons out of him. And that's solid for fantasy compared to a lot of the guys around him. So I'm happy to take him around this region. Bryce Young is someone that I think maybe I could have had a spot or two higher. It's just that he hasn't looked good the last couple of seasons. He certainly took a step forward last season, and bringing Ted McMillan in really helps, but they're so intent on running the ball. They've got 1 million running backs on their roster, and they're all pretty solid at the moment. Just paid Chuba Hubbard a whole heap of money. Their defense is improving. This could be a situation where Bryce Young doesn't even need to pass the ball a lot. He does have a little bit of a rushing floor and had 6 rushing touchdowns last year after none in his rookie season. But this isn't a season where you can feel very good about this. He could easily be out of the starting role in like halfway through next season. It's not like there's someone that's going to come in and take over. It's not like Andy Dalton's going to be the new guy, but I think we could see by next year that it's not Bryce Young as a starting quarterback anymore. For that reason, I'm very nervous about taking him any higher than this in Dynasty. As opposed to this next guy, he's very solid in Matthew Stafford, but we're talking about a guy who is old. Even by my standards, he's old. 37, he's not going to have many years left. We've seen what happens when quarterbacks start to hit that 40 mark. The injuries are starting to come already. He hasn't had a good fantasy season in about 4 years. He has the weapons around him for sure, but his ability to actually be a good fantasy quarterback is very unlikely. He's had 1 rushing touchdown in the last 8 years. It's not like he has any rushing floor at all. And he's not passing the ball enough to make him a super fantasy quarterback. So for that reason, he's not someone I'm particularly interested in. Also not particularly interested in this guy, Jackson Dart. I just don't think he's very good. Frankly, I feel like there is room to grow. I feel like there's talent there, but I think the chances of him reaching it is quite low. So for that reason, I'm not going out of my way to get him in Dynasty. I know some people absolutely love him, but this Giants team looks awful. He's in a really bad quarterback room situation with quarterbacks that are actually wanting to play and win now, and Russell Wilson and in Jameis Winston. Obviously, that will get a little bit cleaner at some point in time, but I don't know. I don't like this situation for Dart. I don't like the weapons they've got around him. I know Malik Neighbors is amazing, but I think this team's going to be rebuilding for a couple of years yet. So for that reason, he's someone I'm not interested in Dynasty. I think the floor is just way too low, and we don't even know when he's going to be playing. And in at 30, I mean, if a guy's a starting NFL quarterback and gets given a solid contract, you have to put him somewhere there in Dynasty. Unfortunately, Geno moves to the Raiders, who look like they're going to be running the ball on the ground a lot. They don't have great wide receivers. They need to add something to Jacoby Myers, and they just plain didn't. I don't like the guys they brought in. I don't like what they're doing. Brock Bowers is a good weapon. Ashton Genty is a good weapon, but without good wide receivers, your quarterback is never going to be good for fantasy. And Jacoby Myers is not it. I don't think that the rookies they brought in are going to answer the questions. He did have admittedly 300-odd rushing yards in a couple of the last 3 years, but I still think his floor is very, very low, and I feel like he's going to get found out very easily and be out of this team within a year or two and be out of the league within a year or two, certainly as a starter, given he's already 35. Now, a couple of guys not on this list I just wanted to mention. Daniel Jones would come in next. For Indy, obviously very solid player, but nothing special. Has just done an okay job at times. I think was done a little bit hard by the Giants. I feel like they could have treated him a bit better. They didn't give him many opportunities there. They had a pretty poor team around him. I feel like he's a better NFL quarterback than we saw, and it wouldn't surprise me if he takes over with the Colts, but I think they give Richardson the first shot, and that's why it's hard to trust Jones as anything more than a backup for now. Jalen Milroe has a massive amount of upside as a fantasy quarterback. The problem is his arm is just awful at this stage. It's going to take a long time before he can get out on the field. I think it's going to be Sam Darnold's job for a while, but I do think there is at least upside there that if you're rebuilding, you might want to use him. A couple of the Cleveland guys, for example, Deshaun Watson, Shedeur Sanders, Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, they're all inside my top 40 because they all have a chance to be a starter this year. The only guy who doesn't is Dylan Gabriel. I have no idea why they drafted him. So I do think that any of those guys could end up with that job, but you can't really trust any of them for that reason. No one else particularly excites me from a fantasy perspective. It'll be interesting to see what Pittsburgh does because I feel like you're still going to have a guy who's like a QB 20, whoever gets that starting job out of Aaron Rodgers and Mason Rudolph or anyone else they happen to bring in if they trade for Kirk Cousins, for example. So any of those guys become interesting if you're in a very deep league or a super flex league, because all of a sudden you need starting quarterbacks. You need to take those opportunities. And that's all we've got for my quarterback dynasty rankings. If you've got any questions, either hit me up on Instagram or Twitter or just comment below. You can also check out my full rankings over at ffdfantasyfootball.com. Plus, it'd be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. That really helps us out. I'll be back with my running back rankings in the coming days. I will see you guys then.